for Shifting Platforms, the Decentralization of Art Education. Avantika?
Thank you, Karen, and thank you to the committee for making this possible, and of course, to all our panelists. I'm not wearing a mask because I'm in a closed space, just so you know. Heidi Schwegler, our current artist in residence at the library, explores a wide range of materials in the service of her subject matter. Drawn to the peripheral ruin, she deftly incorporates found objects with traditional craft and sculpture media. In Heidi's own words, I consciously consider and actively seek out the abandoned and the discarded. For me, they are visible markers of change. They are remnants held in suspicion that signify a shift in value as well as their place in time. Schwegler's accolades include fellowships from the Oregon Arts Commission, the Hallie Ford Fellowship, and many more. She was artist in residence at McDowell, Pilchuck, VCCA, Yaddo, Anderson Ranch Arts Center, and Bullseye Glass Company, among others. Notable shows include her inclusion in the Portland 2016 Biennial of Contemporary Art, curated by Michelle Grabner and presented by Disjecta Contemporary, and her 10-year retrospective Botched Execution at the Art Gym at Marylhurst University and the Sheldon Museum of Art in Lincoln, Nebraska. Schwegler holds a BFA from the University of Kansas and an MFA from the University of Oregon. Go Ducks. She divides her time between Portland, Oregon, and Yucca Valley, California, where she is the founding director of the Yucca Valley Material Lab. Next presenter is Christine Clark, who is an artist living and working in Portland. Her work focuses on public art, installation art, and abstract sculpture in steel, steel wire, and mixed materials. She has had numerous solo and group exhibitions locally and nationally. She is a two-time recipient of the Oregon Arts Commission Fellowship Grant, as well as a Professional Development Grant, and has been awarded residencies such as the John Michael Kohler Arts and Industry Residency and the UCross Foundation in Wyoming. Christine is former professor and head of the Metals Department at the Oregon College of Arts and Crafts, and is a member of 9 Gallery, an alternative gallery that exhibits experimental and installation work. She is co-owner of 1920 Studios, a maker and educational space in Portland. Our last presenter is Carl Berkheimer, who is the former chair of the MFA in Craft at Oregon College of Arts and Crafts. His teaching career includes positions and assignments in Virginia, the USA, Qatar, Uganda, Turkey, and China. Berkheimer earned his MFA from the Department of Crafts and Material Studies at Virginia Commonwealth University and a Bachelor of Environmental Design in Architecture from North Carolina State University. Carl's practice is rooted in utilitarian simplicity that forefronts the objects in relation to and often interacting with the body. His work has been exhibited nationally, including shows in Los Angeles, Seattle, New York, and Portland. His critical writings have been published in Ceramic Monthly, and he has received numerous recognitions as well as institutional fundings, including awards from the Contemporary Northwest Arts and Portland Art Museum. His upcoming solo show, Not in Between, opens 3 days from now, 5 days at Ditch Projects in Springfield, Oregon. Please join me in welcoming these amazing artists and educators who are, without a doubt, movers and shakers in their field and beyond.
Thank you, Avantika. I think I was chosen to go first and kind of set the stage. I'm going to kind of talk a little bit about RCI, or Rainmaker Crafts Initiative, its relationship to Oregon College of Art and Craft, and that relationship to a certain idea of decentralized art education. I'm going to start off with how I'm defining decentralized art education. It's a broad, and some people use it as a very broad term, and some people use it as a very specific term when they say decentralized. I'm going to use it in a more casual term, not speaking particularly of pedagogy, but of structure. When I'm speaking of decentralized education, I'm mostly talking about a shifting of decision-making. So instead of a decision-making from a top-down structure that one might find, say, at a university, to a more fluid or kind of bottom-up decision-making that would be kind of, I think what's good about it is it tends to respond to the local, local conditions. So that's how I'm going to use the term when I discuss it, although there's plenty of other ways to talk about that term. So Rainmaker Craft Initiative, or RCI, as I'll refer to it, is really born out of the closure of Oregon College of Art and Craft. As we all know, Oregon Art and Craft closed, officially announced its closure in 2019, and the last of the students that had a teach out at PNCA, Pacific Northwest College of Art, for the last graduating class in 2020. It was sad to see OCAC go for many reasons. It was a small organization. It, in some ways, was kind of decentralized in structure, although it was very kind of isolated up on the hill outside of Portland. Not a lot of people knew about it, but the people that did know about it saw kind of the brilliance that was happening up there. I've often talked about OCAC as being a kind of an alternative education disguised as a craft school. So students, on paper, it looked like people were studying just very specific ideas of woodworking or metalsmithing or ceramics, but really they were learning language to how to put their ideas into fruition, and also from a spectrum of the functional to the highly conceptual. And that cross conversation was really interesting to me, and I learned a lot. I started at OCAC in 2006. But I was kind of a newcomer and by the time the school closed with my 13 years. Christine Clark was there for over 30 years, and Heidi was there for 20. The three of us and the rest of the faculty got along fabulously. And we kind of really talked about the school was a great place to learn as a teacher and to learn as a student and to learn as an administrator. What was really interesting about OCAC is that a lot of the decision-making, for most of its history, a lot of the decision-making of the curriculum was really kind of from the faculty level. It wasn't from an administrative level handed down. So that kind of got my brain thinking about ideas of decentralized education. Well, the school closed after 100 years plus, and the way I kind of describe it, it was like a vase falling off the mantle and shattering into a bunch of pieces. So it was too broken to ever reassemble. There was no desire to reassemble it, but there were all these lovely shards from kind of an expansion from what was the original whole. And that's kind of how we started talking about RCI. RCI happened really fast. We actually, the 4 faculty members, myself included, were able to take over Rainmaker Artist in Residency, which was an existing 501c3 nonprofit. And the director and the board at the time were welcoming of us to take over and change the direction of the organization to focus more on, instead of a residency, more on an idea of access, seeding, and support of ideas around creativity, particularly craft and art. We started it because we could take over a 501c3 fast enough, we were able to receive equipment and assets from the closing of OCAC. So all that equipment that had been collected over all those decades, we were able to get a share of it, as well as many other institutions around town. And so we took that equipment, and we're calling it right now, we kind of call it a micro granting, so that we loaned the equipment to other maker spaces within the Portland area to try to keep this idea of creativity around craft alive. Because actually, when it comes down to it, the brick and mortar and the material, the machinery, etc., those are what everybody sees, but really what was the core of the institution were the people. So the Rainmaker Craft Initiative took on this idea to then perpetuate that knowledge base that was at the school and some of the assets of the equipment and be able to put it out in the world in a different way. So it wasn't just located on a campus up on a hill outside of Portland. It was now spread out throughout Portland at these various maker spaces that people were using it to not only make work for a living, but also to make work as a for teaching and for expression. So that's how we kind of started talking about this decentralized, as Rainmaker, this decentralized, or I should not thinking about, but applying this decentralized art education was to first start spreading out that equipment to allow access for people that, one, maybe never knew of OCAC, or two, people that didn't have access to OCAC, because OCAC was not directly in Portland. OCAC was a private institution, and therefore the tuition was kind of high for BFAs and MFA programming. But this is a way of getting that equipment and that knowledge out in the world. And so now each one of our partner studios, they have their own way that they do things, their own way of teaching, their own way of using the equipment. And our only requirement for the loan is that they give back to the community, that they provide access to people that normally would not have had access to that equipment, and also have access to the knowledge that the people running those institutions have. So Christine Clark at 9020 is actually one of the recipients of several of the legacy metalsmithing tools that were at OCAC, mostly hammers and anvils and forming tools, so that she, who is like one of the premier metalsmiths in the area, was able to have that equipment that she's familiar with and then allow others her knowledge and access to that equipment. Heidi, while not a partner of necessarily of the organization RCI, is an ally and a close confidant when we talk about ideas and sharing ideas. Heidi and I both, I've spent time down at Yucca Valley with Heidi, working with her in her organization, but also Heidi has returned up to Portland several times and has worked with me on ideas around Rainmaker Craft Initiative. So that's how I'm going to kind of leave it. I'm just going to kind of leave it on that kind of broad note, but that's what RCI is doing around town. It's growing slowly. We think about this idea of nurturing instead of this idea of fantastical idea and then implementing that idea. We're practicing the craft of creating a 501c3. We're practicing a craft of decentralized education. And so we're starting off new, we're starting off slow and growing something that we hope will become larger and be heard of more often. So I'm going to turn it over to Christine Clark.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Oh, wait a second. I don't. Okay, can you hear me? Great.
You're good to go.
Okay, so thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to share about what we do at 9020 Studios. So I'm going to go through all these images. So my wife, Mary, and I purchased this small commercial building in Portland about 2.5 years ago, knowing that we both needed studio space and felt that paying rent was not a very good investment. And so with the help of the SBA, the Small Business Association, we were able to purchase this building. So our goals were to have studio spaces for ourselves, but we also wanted to have a maker space. a community of people to share ideas, to collaborate, to have strong makers as part of the craft movement in Portland. And so this is an image of the upper floor outside. It's about 6,000 square feet on a half acre, and it has 9 studios, upper and lower. We took possession of the building just 2 months before OCAC closed. So the timing was perfect for us to dedicate one of our spaces to furthering a small part of craft education in Portland. And in partnership with RCI, as Carl had discussed, we acquired some of the metalsmithing and jewelry equipment from OCAC. And so it was just sort of natural that we got equipment from the metal studio. And that's how we established 90/20 Workshop. So one of the first things we did was put together a Kickstarter campaign to make improvements on the building. So for the classroom, as well for other things the studio needed, such as like electrical upgrades, ventilation for torches, classroom renovation, student toolkits, gas lines, and things like that. And we raised $38,850 from a $31,000 campaign from 204 backers. Our tenants helped contribute to our gifts, and we successfully completed this campaign. So it went from this to this in a few short months. So I want to give you a quick tour of the classroom studio. So let's see, the space is about 530 square feet. We have 3 soldering stations that run on natural gas and oxygen and oxyacetylene. We have 7 jeweler's benches, so we can have a class of 7 students. A really good selection of hand tools and vices and ambles. And the best part of it, of what we acquired, with all the old forming stakes and hammers, these are absolutely invaluable. And the majority of them are not things you can purchase today. A lot of these stakes and hammers are from like the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and a lot of them are handmade. So we have an annealing shed also, and eventually it will be made into a large scale annealing and soldering area. So we'll be able to offer raising classes. So we can use a lot of these really great tools. So each bench has a flex shaft that goes with it. We have a couple of bandsaws, a jump shear, and then that big door opens up so we can be out in the open. And it's a really great studio that we keep improving on. So our goal is to offer 1 seat, or maybe even two in every class, to a scholarship student, a BIPOC, or underprivileged individuals. We started offering classes a tiny bit of momentum. We got some momentum, and then we were shut down because of COVID. And we just started offering classes again recently. And we needed to get enough enrollment to offer our scholarship seats. And we realized that there is a desire for craft education, that people really need this kind of outlet. And 90/20 is hoping to help provide that in both person and online classes. So I'm going to give you a quick tour of the wood shop. This is Mary's domain, where she runs her business, Incidental Design. Many of our tenants use the workshop as well. We have a CNC router that we acquired through a partnership through another organization called Avid CNC. And Avid CNC also has a space in our building. Okay, so then I'm going to show you a tour of my studio. This is the metal shop. I do a lot of welding and a lot of different scales of metal work. We have a CNC plasma cutter, and we I do a lot of different kinds of things. So I do smaller metal work in this area here. And this is also where I record my online classes. So it's a great studio space for us. I'm gonna move on. This is our office upstairs, where we do laser cutting and computer work. This studio is shared by 3 people: Winona Huang, Bon Malton and Lily Wilson, and they do a variety of things from jewelry making, a lot of resin casting and sculpture. This studio is shared by two silversmiths, Sarah Thompson and Laura Eiler. This studio is shared by two people, John Jaffe and Moose, who do woodworking. And this studio is Lyra Korsmos. She does a mixture of techie making and 3D printing and sewing and a bunch of other very crazy electronic things. We have a common kitchen, a couple of restrooms, and a huge outdoor area. And here's an upper floor hallway. It's a great environment, and we've had very little turnover in tenants since we opened. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about our online classes that I'm offering through podia.com. I started this endeavor during COVID, realizing that many people really like an online education where you can get your own tools and you can purchase your own videos and you can work at your own pace. And I put together this mashup of videos. They're kind of fun to watch. They're just promotional things that I post on Instagram to gain interest in these classes. And so far they're geared toward beginners with a minimum number of tools required to make simple jewelry that you can do at home. I'm working on producing more and more videos that will be eventually we can offer to more advanced students who most likely have more equipment at home. So far I have 5 sessions, and each session includes several videos that are instructional, process, and resource focused. I feature close-ups of my hands working and do an explanatory voiceover, and they are highly edited for efficiency and brevity. Nothing is longer than 30 minutes. Most are between 12 and 20 minutes long in range, and they are really inexpensive to purchase. And I feel like that it's one of the waves of the future for education. We're really dedicated to this education, as we are seeing a lot of other art colleges and small liberal arts colleges closing. With both online and in-person classes, we can at least touch a few individuals, and hopefully that will grow as we get more experience in offering our classes. So I'm going to move on from that. So I'm not teaching any of the in-person classes myself. I'm getting former OCAC graduates to teach, and they love it. They're gaining teaching experience, and they have a lot more involvement in 90/20. We're trying to offer a variety of different types of classes, both short and short workshops and longer classes. And I just wanted to kind of tell you this one little story about one student. We had a 2-day workshop on simple band ring making in July, and one of the students said that she was absolutely giddy, and she hasn't been so excited about something in such a long time, that she was ecstatic that she could make a series of rings. I don't know how many she made in a 2-day workshop. So I taught at OCAC for over 30 years, and I feel like this is really in my bones to spread the crafts education, and I'm super proud to be part of RCI and the maker community in Portland. Okay.
Thanks, Christine. I have complete tool envy at this point. And if someone can just let me know that you can hear me, this is very odd.
Yes, we
Okay,
can hear
great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. So I am Heidi Schwegler, and I'm going to share my screen here. All right. So in 2018, I woke up one morning and I suddenly
Heidi?
realized, yes.
Excuse me, but your screen is not displaying.
Oh, cool. Oh, I know what happened. Let's see, where are you guys?
Okay. it's
Okay,
working
here we
now.
are. So as I mentioned, in 2018, I had that odd sensation of realizing I had been teaching for 20 years. I don't know how that happened. Life just passed really quickly. Back in 98, Christine Clark actually gave me the job at OCAC to be the studio manager in Metals and to teach a few classes, which I was really grateful for. So I stayed, stuck around, and I eventually became full professor. And then I was really honored in 2015 to become the chair of the MFA in Applied Craft and Design, which was a joint program between OCAC and Pacific Northwest College of Art. And Carl was actually one of the designers of that program. I passionately believe in what they do there. It's, students making original work for an applied purpose. So in a nutshell, it's about making a self-sustained practice for yourself. And after so many years of working with these students, I admit I became a little jealous and wanted to try to do that for myself after having taught for so long. So my husband and I, at the time, decided that we needed to make a change, not only with our careers, but with where we were living. I was kind of tired of always having the right answers. So I was ready to kind of start it again. So in 2018, we bought a junkyard. It was basically 2 acres in Yucca Valley, California, which is right by Joshua Tree, about 2 hours east of LA. And it has been a major work in progress. So I really wanted a very different landscape and experience than Portland, the Pacific Northwest. And the Mojave Desert has definitely given that to me if you've never visited here. It is one of the most beautiful deserts I've ever experienced, but it's also one of the most brutal. And I find that to be actually quite inspiring. I have seen things and insects and animals that I have never seen before. This is a Jerusalem cricket that I found in the park, and it was about 3 inches long. I had no idea what I was looking at, but they're actually quite benign. They just remind me of Dr. Seuss. And then we have 2 resident roadrunners on the property. They were actually born on the property. And I found out that they like to eat ground beef, raw beef. They are carnivorous. And you like to have roadrunners around in the desert because they are the fiercest predator of the rattlesnake. So this is what the property looked like when we moved in. It was really kind of overwhelming. I spent the first month really just hauling things away. I filled about 7 industrial dumpsters, which are about 20 feet in length. The previous owner was a hoarder and a collector, AKA he wanted to be an artist. So he really liked to build things. This was an outhouse that wasn't really functional, but it was the home to a green Mojave rattlesnake, which is, if you don't know, the deadliest rattlesnake in North America. So that was kind of a shocker. And he also built this Western style gas station with the tanks and everything. And all of this had to be taken away. If he could see the property now, he'd probably be horrified. But no, look at this picture right here, because this point of view now looks like this. So before I moved to the desert, I wrote the business plan for Yucca Valley Material Lab, which is an artist residency and workshop program based in the desert. So artists can live here for 2 to 3 weeks, and it's instructional. So the whole point of being here is that you get to learn something new. I will provide the teacher and the studio and the equipment, and then you get to explore with wild abandon. But we also teach workshops as well. So my husband is a little bit more private than I am. And he said, I'm totally cool with these artists living on our private property. I only have one request, in that they don't sleep in our house. So when you're in the desert, rather than getting a permit and building a building, you buy a camper. So I found this for about $200. I brought in 5 amazing graduates from MFA in Applied Craft and Design, and they held a design build in the camper. So I've done many residencies in my life, enough to know that the studio that you work in is super important, but so is where you sleep, because that's where you go to unwind, to process what's happening. And so I wanted them to really think about how this space could not only be for essential living, but to be a sort of otherworldly experience for the artists. And that's what they did. They transformed this camper into this really beautiful, very efficient space where you feel like you're living inside an artist's crate. So there's a kitchenette, a wonderful writing desk, a sleeping area, a plum shower, and a toilet. And you're in it. You feel the Santa Ana winds, you hear the coyotes, you really get to experience this other place. I think artists are actually more sad to leave this than they are the studio. But the studio is pretty amazing too. So I can have 2 artists in residence at a time, or 10 students if it's a workshop. I put this 10-foot garage door in so that they really do feel like they're in the desert. And I position the building so that they get to see the sun setting every evening, it's always spectacular. So after the program got started, I knew I needed to have more than one camper. The artists really want to build a network. They want to have conversations with one another. So I'm now up to 4 campers. I also have an internship program. And my first intern designed this central landscape, hardscape, before the campers were even there. And I had no idea how important this space was actually going to become, because this is where we all come together to eat, to talk about what's just happened in the studio, to see the animals come out in the evening and the dusk. It's pretty amazing. So these concrete cubes are seating, they're pedestals, and then there's planters. This is the inside of the Airstream, by the way. I had a former OCAC student design it, and then another student fabricate it. That college was amazing, and I feel like we educated some of the best makers in the country. I also do work trade for some of the residencies. So I had an artist come in from LA who started the outdoor shower, which you're seeing off to the right, which is the main shower for the Airstream. And then he got a residency in trade. And then sorry for the low quality, but you still can read it. If you're interested, you should follow Lazy Eye Gallery on Instagram, because I don't have enough going on. I thought I'd start a new endeavor. This was the original water tower to the house. So when we moved in, you see what it looked like on the left. It was rotting. It was full of rat poop. There was no door, no ladder. So we worked on this during the pandemic, and I made it into Lazy Eye Gallery. I had lazy eye in both eyes as a kid, so I thought it would be just the perfect name for visual art space. So in terms of the materials that are taught or explored here, lost wax casting is very popular. It's hard to find programs that can actually teach you these processes. We also do paper mache, so you could work really large scale in terms of sculpture or performative masks. Ceramic, we just had Hannah Pierce come up from San Diego, and she taught slab building as well as surface treatment. And then Carl has actually come down twice. I love getting my friends down here to teach. And he has really mastered this process of earth casting, where you make your own silt sort of recipe. You put that in the ground right out in the desert floor, and then you can cast concrete and plaster right into the silt. And then I had to put this in as well because Christine is flying out here tomorrow. She's going to be teaching a workshop this weekend on wire welded vessel forms, which I'm super excited about. And then one of our most popular classes is neon. So you can see I run the gambit. If I find the material interesting, I'm going to teach it here. This was actually so popular that we offered 2 more classes in January, and they sold out the minute I put them on Instagram. So Carl said something really interesting in his lecture when he talked about responding to the local. And he and I actually had this conversation, I think it was during the pandemic. He came down here, and I began to realize that I didn't really know who my community was and who could really benefit from this program. So I began to look around, and I began to get to reach out to other people. And I realized that 29 Palms, I mean, I already knew this, but I didn't really know it, that 29 Palms has a huge Marine base, and there are many, many veterans within our community. There's also a nonprofit in Joshua Tree called Mill Tree, whose mission is to bring artists together through art. So we sort of partnered, and I was able to raise $2,000 with their support so that I could fund a workshop for veterans or family members of veterans to take this sand casting and aluminum workshop with Ben Buswell. And he's kneeling next to me. He actually teaches at PCC Rock Creek. And it was incredible. It was just a few weeks ago. We had 2 vets, 2 wives of vets, and then 4 civilians. And it was so much fun. And I know that I absolutely want to do this again. So you can see here, he's carving into the sand, the drag and the cope, so the 2 parts of the mold. They were making relief patterns. And then you suit up into these really awesome heat resistant silver space age suits, and you can actually pour. A couple of the students were intimidated by the idea of pouring the aluminum, but once we got through it, everybody was super excited to try it out. And I admit that it is not so much about the final object in this program. It is so much more about exploration and working with others and just seeing what comes of that. But here are a couple of examples from this last workshop in terms of what they were able to make with the relief pattern. So that was the program. And now I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the work in the library under the title of Uncertain Placement. And I was so excited when Avantika invited me. Just the thought of being able to install in a library raised so many kind of conceptual challenges and just interesting ways of thinking about my work and what to install in there, that it was really, really fun for me. And I have to admit, I think it's one of my best shows because of that. So I came up with this title for 3 different reasons. And whether you see that when you look at the work, it doesn't really matter that much. But for this lecture, I thought it would be interesting for you to kind of think about this as I show you some of the pieces. In terms of uncertain placement, I actually started when we were walking around the library and thinking of a title. I was thinking of the taxonomy of the unknown, and just thinking about putting together a collection of objects that were really quite alien or from unknown origin in a way. And as I started doing more research on taxonomy of the unknown, I started to see uncertain placement. And I thought, wow, that's really kind of perfect when I look at the objects. It's so fun when you can all of a sudden start to see your work in a new way through language. So one of the ways that I think about uncertain placement is, and it's something that I do often, is to bring really different objects together into a new object or within close proximity of one another, so that you can create a sort of new narrative on those objects. You can see them through a different lens because of their new relationship. The other sort of uncertain placement is I live in the desert where there are really hardcore winds. And because of that, trash tends to blow around a lot. And the cactus or the Joshua tree tends to stop it. So as you drive around, you start to see things that you really don't expect to see in the desert. And then the third lens that I was thinking about is me, and the fact that I moved from the Pacific Northwest, which you're all very familiar with, to the Mojave Desert, which was a complete 360 in terms of environment. Everything here is new for me. All the plants, all the animals, the way this little tiny town runs. There's only 20,000 people living here. So everything has been a sort of placing me in a completely new place. So with this piece, there are so many new animals that I'm experiencing. There's the cottontail, the jackrabbit, the roadrunner, the rattlesnake. I just saw a great horned owl last night. And I've seen a lot of them die on the property because, you know, it's very hard to live here. So with this, I took a kitschy little resin sculpture of a bunny. I made a mold of it and using a rubber mold, and I was able to flip the mold inside out and then cast it so it looks like a bunny, but it also looks somewhat alien. So there's something that sort of shifted within that animal. And then the cinder block was actually buried on the property, and I found it and decided to use it as the pedestal. Okay, why is this not going down? So when I talked about the uncertain placement of seeing trash stuck in cactus, I actually used that as inspiration. So there's a Rent-A-Center just down the street by our grocery store. And behind the Rent-A-Center, there's kind of a vast little section of the desert. Well, the young people who work at the Rent-A-Center will unpack a Samsung fridge or a big screen TV, and they shove the foam in the dumpster, but it always blows out. And so there's in this little area, you will find cardboard boxes and foam and plastic bags just kind of stuck there and all the sharp cactus needles. So I've been gathering that foam and working with it. In fact, Avantika, while she was here for her residency, was out on a run and saw this particular piece of foam, and I had to drive over and get it. So I bring it back and then I reductively sculpt it, which means I pull the foam apart, make a mold of it, and cast it in glass. Making a mold of an object then allows me to cast it in different materials. So this is also in the show, and I cast it in hydrocal, which is very, very hard plaster. I found another paver on the property then and spray painted it silver. So another method that I use a lot in my practice is copying, and not so much bringing an object to my studio, making a mold and copying it, because sometimes you can't do that, especially if it's in the Met Museum, but different ways of hand copying. So this is one of my favorite sculptures in the Greek and Roman section of the Met. And it's a flutist who is blowing so hard that his face starts to become pretty distorted. And of course, because it's fragile, the flute broke off. But what I did is I took pictures around it with my iPhone, went back to the studio, made a mold of it, cast it in glass. And instead of recreating the flute, I decided to have a more contemporary form, that of the bendy straw. So I made that as a metal bendy straw, plated it with 24K. And the first iteration in the gallery, I actually inserted the straw into the wall, and then the head was across the gallery. So it looked like he blew so hard on that straw that it impaled itself in the gallery wall. Well, I was really excited when I got to the library and I saw that massively large vitrine, which I have no idea how you guys normally use it, but I thought it's perfect for these two pieces that would typically be on two different areas of the space. And I like the idea of enclosing it now in this plastic area so that it kind of energizes that space within the vitrine. And then I use a lot of found objects in my work. In fact, some of the work in my initial presentation, there was the picture of the cat and the shoe, and I don't know why that didn't show up. Maybe I just accidentally skipped over it, but you'll notice in the space, or maybe you wouldn't notice, but some of the objects are actually research objects for me. So I wouldn't necessarily consider them to be finished sculptures, but they're things that have been floating around in my studio for a really long time that I use as inspiration. And so that cat shape with the shoe, I would normally push up against a wall, but I, like the head, I was excited to try it inside a vitrine so you could get the full 360 around the form. The same is kind of true on this one. I used to go to Scrap a lot in Portland. I don't know if they still exist, but you could go find really odd, eccentric things there. And this was a prosthetic foam arm that I brought back to the studio and eventually covered in this wood putty and made it hard and then shellacked it and built this stand specifically for this show. And then this is the last piece I wanted to show you. So that was a tetherball that I actually found on the property, and the desert sun really cooked it and cracked that surface in such a beautiful way I couldn't get rid of it. So I ended up making a mold of it and casting it in glass. And then the foot is actually, I took a mold of my foot, and then I took a mold of other people's toes and started resculpting them into a new sort of oddly odd foot, and removed one of the toes. So it has this new sort of character about it. So when thinking about uncertain placement, of course, maybe this is obvious, but placing the foot on the tetherball, but also these two materials together, taking a really heavy, that foot weighs about 20, 25 pounds, and placing it on a glass object is not really how we would imagine those two to be residing with one another. And so that was my last slide. And I will go ahead and stop share and mute myself. Thank you.
Well, thank you to Carl, Christine, Heidi, for sharing their work, their activism, their art with us. And we do have a few questions that I will open up to the panelists for discussion. And actually, this first question is it's requested that all three panelists answer. What has been your greatest surprise or something that you never anticipated, either good or hard, so far in starting your projects?
I'll go.
Go ahead, Christine.
One of the biggest surprises for me was how much time and effort it takes to maintain a building and maintain workshop classes and all the details that go into it. When you're part of an institution, a lot of the stuff is taken care of for you. And so I think there's a lot of things involved. And so it's interesting how, I was teaching for so many years, but then, and I felt like I was always so busy and I hardly had time to do anything, this and that. And then when I stopped teaching because the college closed, I thought, oh my God, I have all this time. And it turns out, though, that the time is taken up by all those little details of trying to get the workshop running and going. And but at the same time, it's really joyful knowing that it's something that we've organized and that we have partners working with us. And so, yeah.
So I think it's really interesting knowledge. Like, I think the whole reason I went to academia is because I never wanted to stop being a student, but I'm still tripped up every now and then. So entering this idea of running a 501c3 or a nonprofit organization is intellectually, anybody can get their head around it. It's not that complicated of an idea, but it's still such an amazingly deep well of knowledge that is really only gained by action and doing it. So I think I'm always surprised when, I do my research, I really think something out, and then I get in it and I realize just how little I don't know. And so I might have the intellectual knowledge, but I don't have the practice. So in some ways that was the biggest surprise, but it's always a surprise for me.
And then hopefully what I'm saying won't be too redundant, because they seem to be saying a lot of the things that I was quickly jotting down. Is, believe it or not, I miss having a boss. I really miss having my colleagues. I keep saying we throughout my presentation, but I'm really the only one here. I'm installing the toilets. I'm meeting with the artists. I'm deciding who's going to be teaching. And it's hard after having 20 years of feeling like my colleagues were my family. And I know that I do reach out to them, and that's really helpful. But I admit that that's been one of the most challenging parts of starting this program. But on the other hand, I have to say, it's been really easy. And I owe it all to OCAC. The experience that I got from teaching there, the experience of being the chair of a graduate program and having that administrative experience, and the experience of being an artist has all come together to make building this program easier than I ever could have imagined.
Thanks. And sticking with this, the theme of the projects that you're working on, I have one more question, and then we have a few questions about it's more along the art and art techniques, and so we'll get to those. But for each of you, another question. Have you developed a plan for continuity? It would be nice to know that all of these spaces and resources will go on existing beyond us and beyond the here and now. So do you have a continuity plan?
I'll start. So not to go down a rabbit hole of board meetings and et cetera, and the things that are being discussed too deeply, but one thing we've been really interested in, there was a really interesting article, I think Ron, I I can't remember his first name. His last name was Rudd, who wrote an article, the Canadian organization he wrote it for, and it was about this idea of like what to do now with the world's changed with COVID, with our social social responsibilities are changing, and our knowledge about social responsibilities are changing. The world's changing really fast in a short amount of time. And so how do things move forward? And in some ways, we need to do things differently. And so what we're trying to do at RCI is not fall into the trap of just being an institution that is only planning to be around forever. We really are thinking about how do we program our end? How do we program a sunset? And the sunset doesn't mean we may never ever exist afterwards, but if we set a date, then the board, as the board develops and the people sitting on the board now step off and new people come on, it will always be about planning towards the sunset. So what will happen post sunset? And we think that right now that's the best way of making sure that we don't just become yet another 501c3 art organization within a sea of them, that we're doing something a little different and that we're staying relevant to the current, whatever's going on in the current locality. So that's how we're dealing with it.
I'll take a stab at that. So 90/20 is relatively new, and we're still just getting our sea legs. I feel like our plan for continuity is going to be consistency and to keep going and to build on what we've started, but also being really open for what's asked for and what's next and what students demand. And so I feel like I'm just interested in just continuing and doing well and getting a reputation for offering classes for both online and in person to those who really need it and who really want it. So it's pretty simple.
Yeah, and this program is also so new that I am thinking about 5 minutes after this lecture, not so much, 5 years, but I will say that during the pandemic, I initially was really resistant to doing things like Zoom or going out and hitting the pavement within my own neighborhood to see who actually lives here. And it really showed me that we have to learn how to adapt very quickly to how the world is changing. And so I said yes to trying some Zoom workshops, and I began just making phone calls to people within our community. And I began to see how quickly these things actually work. And so I feel like in terms of continuity with the program, because I am so much learning on the job, that if I can really learn how to respond and adapt and to figure out who really could benefit from this program, I think that longevity will be a part of the program because of that.
Okay, thank you. Well, we do have 2 questions, actually for Heidi about your art. One is when working with metals, do you purposefully add different impurities and imperfections? And if you do, then for what purpose?
I think they're probably, oh wait, did my video just shut off again?
Yes, but we can hear you. Oh, there you are.
Okay, I think they're probably talking about the foot and how there was an imperfection on the top of the foot, which, I was trained as a craftsperson. I learned what good craftsmanship was when I was getting my master's at the U of O. And as soon as I graduated, I began to use the notion of craftsmanship conceptually, because I make objects about difficult subject matter. So I needed to make them really well so that it was easier maybe to kind of dive into the more difficult things in life. But when I was offered a bullseye, so I got really good at making is what I'm trying to say. And when I was offered a residency at Bullseye Glass, my success rate was about 10%. And this was after 20 years of making things really well. It was quite humbling. And when I would open up these molds and I would just get partial casts and there'd be accidents within the object, I was pretty devastated. But the more I began to look at those objects and those accidents, the more I began to realize that they were so much more poetic and powerful than anything I could have designed from the outset. So now I actively seek the accident within my work. And with that foot, I had just purchased a foundry for the property and I took a chance. I made a mold. I had no idea what I was doing. I melted lead in a furnace. I had to lift it up by myself and pour it into the mold. So I did a lot of things wrong. And part of the foot just sort of blew out and didn't cast. And I love that about that piece. So I like the ignorance that can happen in making and allowing the material to show me its limitations and where it can go with it rather than where I can go with it. Hopefully that answered the question.
Thanks, Heidi. And we only have a minute left. So I would love to give all three of our panelists just a moment to say if there's something exciting, like Carl has a show coming up in Springfield, but if there is something with a show or an event that you're involved with that you would like a moment to talk about that for the group that's here, please do so. So maybe we can start with Carl because you have your upcoming show in Springfield.
Yes, so that's it. That's all I can, that's about as far as I can see right now. I'm actually down at Ditch Project right now. I just drove the truck down here and installing, and it's a very large, I'll do the camera thing. So I don't know, you can see out there in the gallery, we just unload the truck and there's piles of parts and pieces that I'm going to spend tonight and tomorrow assembling. So that's my excitement and new thing on the horizon.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll go next. Nothing personally going on with me except for the fact that I'm teaching for Heidi in the next couple days, which I'm really excited about. But we have a lot of classes coming up in October. There's the forged cuff bracelet, beginning metalsmithing. We have a cuttlebone and direct casting method class coming up. Another bandring class that I mentioned, earrings, and then an independent studies workshop. There's a chain making workshop. So we have a lot going on, and that's all before January. That's all between now and December. I'm also offering the online classes, and I keep working on those. And so basically that's what we're doing right now. I had a show in April. If you go to my website, you'll be able to see sort of a little tour of that, but that's about it for me right now. That's all really that I can handle right now.
And for me, I'm actually finishing up some work for a gallery in the desert here called Unpaved Gallery, if you guys want to look that up on Instagram. So that opens in 2 weeks. I'm really excited to share my work with my local community. And then we have a workshop coming up in December. Hannah Pierce with the ceramics, she's going to teach another ceramic workshop. And if any of you are interested, because it is in December, maybe you're on break, I still have a few campers open if anybody wants to come down and stay on the property and explore the desert.
Okay, perhaps all of our participants, our panelists, can put their videos on so we can see. And Avantika, I believe, has something to say. Oh, Avantika, you're muted.
If any of you want to make a pitch for interns or internships, you're speaking to a lot of students, so now's your chance. Oh, never.
No, not at the moment, no.
Okay. Any need for interns, or if there's an internship program at Yucca or student?
I always have need for interns.
Great.
Send me an email if you're interested.
All right. Well, thank you. Sharing your passion for both your art and also your projects to bring art to wider communities has been really uplifting this afternoon. And obviously you all have so much going on, so we really appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to come and share your ideas and your passions with us. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for inviting me.
It's fun to be with my colleagues again for a few minutes.
Great. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.
Okay.
Okay.